Welcome to the People Works People cast, where we talk about practical strategies that can transform your business. Buckle up as we talk about HR, business, finance, and more to help you get to the next level.
All right, let's dive right in, folks. We're tackling those overtime rule changes everyone's been buzzing about. It's been a wild ride, from proposed FLSA overhauls to court rulings, leaving businesses in a bit of a haze. We're going to break it all down today, so no matter what happens next, you're in the know and ready to roll.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole thing actually started with a pretty good idea. Remember when the Department of Labor was pushing to give salaried workers more overtime
Oh
protection?
yeah, that caused quite a stir.
They wanted to bump up that salary exemption threshold. The idea was more folks would qualify for overtime pay, which on the surface sounds like a win for employees, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I bet that sent shockwaves through the business world. Suddenly, companies were scrambling to figure out how to deal with it. It
Sure.
wasn't just about understanding the legal jargon. It was about budgets, logistics, some tough decisions overall.
Exactly. And the options weren't always pretty. Some businesses thought, okay, we'll just bite the bullet and raise salaries to hit that new threshold. But let's be real, that can be a huge financial burden.
Makes sense. What else were they considering?
Others were toying with the idea of switching employees to hourly status,
Ah, I see.
which, believe me, comes with its own logistical headaches.
Mm.
And then there was the option of tracking hours for those salaried employees who suddenly became non-exempt. Can you imagine the paperwork? The administrative nightmare?
It's like everyone was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah.
Then, just as businesses were starting to wrap their heads around these changes, boom. The U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas steps in and slams the brakes.
It was a big surprise. And their reasoning was fascinating. It wasn't that they were against stronger overtime protections. It was more about how the Department of Labor was going about it.
Oh, interesting. So what was the problem?
They argued that the DOL basically overstepped its boundaries by creating the salary-only test for exemption.
So instead of looking at an employee's duties, it was just about how much they earn.
Right. And the court said, hey, that kind of change needs to go through a more formal process.
So businesses are already on edge, trying to decode these new rules, and then suddenly rug pulled out from under them. It's a total roller coaster. Now, with a new administration coming in, it feels like we're stuck in limbo. No one knows what's next. Do you think the DOL will fight back? Will they appeal this ruling?
It's a good question. Hard to say for sure. But here's the thing. The court didn't actually say that raising the salary threshold was a bad idea. They just took issue with how the DOL went about it. And remember, even without this federal mandate, some states might just go ahead and implement their own overtime changes anyway.
It's like the overtime saga is turning into a choose-your-own-adventure book. But here's a twist, and this is where things get really intriguing. Our sources are saying that many businesses weren't even ready to make informed decisions about these changes in the first place,
It's true. A lot of companies were flying blind.
like trying to navigate a maze in the dark.
That lack of data is a big problem. It means some companies might have been making choices based on guesswork, not hard evidence. But there's good news. Even with all this uncertainty, there are things businesses can do right now to get prepared. Concrete steps.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
Hmm.
Let's break it down. What's the first move in this overtime chess game?
First, take a deep breath and hold off on any salary bumps you had planned just to meet that old regulation. No need to jump the gun if the rules are still up in the air.
Makes sense. So pause those salary increases. What's next?
Second, if you've got folks getting those fixed-hour stipends, think about switching them to hourly status. Might simplify things down the road.
Got it. So pause the salary hikes, reevaluate those fixed-hour stipends. What's the next play?
This one's crucial. Conduct a thorough duties test audit for all your salaried employees. Every single one, no exceptions.
Hold on a sec. We keep mentioning this duties test, but let's make sure everyone's on the same page. For anyone who's new to this whole overtime rodeo, can you break down what this duties test actually is and why it's suddenly become so important?
Sure. The duties test is like a magnifying glass that examines what an employee actually does at work. It helps us figure out if they genuinely qualify as exempt from overtime. It's not just about their salary, it's about their day-to-day responsibilities. And this is where it gets really interesting because the court, focusing so much on that salary threshold, basically highlighted how important it is to classify employees correctly based on what they do, not just how much they're paid.
So it's like the court is saying, hey, don't just assume someone's exempt because they earn a certain amount. Look closer at their actual job. I'm sensing a theme here. Details matter.
You got it. And getting those details right is crucial for businesses. Misclassification can lead to serious consequences. We're talking legal trouble, back pay, penalties, the whole shebang.
Okay, let's talk about those consequences. What kind of risks are we looking at if a business fails this duties test? Paint a picture for us. What's the worst case scenario?
Imagine this. An employee's been misclassified as exempt, meaning they're not getting overtime pay even though they're putting in the extra hours.
Oof, that's not good.
Now, if that employee decides to sue, or a government agency decides to audit the company, things could get ugly fast.
Yikes.
We're talking potential back pay for all those missed overtime hours, plus penalties, legal fees. It can really add up.
So it's not just about ticking boxes and following the rules. It's about protecting your business from potential financial disaster. And I'm guessing this whole court ruling has probably put a giant spotlight on the duties test. Should businesses be bracing themselves for a wave of audits?
It's definitely possible. Whether it's state-led or the feds eventually pick it up again, I think increased scrutiny around employee classification is pretty much inevitable, and that's why being proactive is so crucial. Businesses need to make sure they're classifying their employees correctly from the get-go. Think of it as preventative medicine.
So instead of waiting for the audit hammer to drop, businesses can take control by doing their own internal audits, right?
Exactly. It's always better to be prepared.
But let's be honest, audits aren't exactly fun. What are the steps involved in conducting a good duties test audit? What should businesses be looking for?
Well, the first step is gathering all the info about each salaried position. Job descriptions, performance reviews, any documentation that shows the tasks and responsibilities of the role.
Makes sense. Get all your ducks in a row.
Right. Then you need to really analyze those duties and see if they match the criteria for each exemption category. This is where it can get tricky because sometimes the lines are blurry. Just because someone's job title says manager doesn't automatically make them exempt.
So we're not just looking at titles, we're really dissecting the day-to-day tasks. It's like becoming an overtime detective. What are some red flags that businesses should be watching out for during this whole audit process?
One of the biggest traps is misclassifying employees who have lots of supervisory duties, but they don't actually meet the specific requirements for that executive exemption.
Ah, I see.
For example, you might have a manager who spends most of their time doing the same tasks as the people they supervise, instead of actually managing and directing the work.
So it's not just about whether they supervise others, it's about the type of supervision and if it matches what the rules say for the executive exemption. All about the nuances. What other red flags should businesses be on the lookout for?
Another common mistake is misclassifying employees who do a lot of routine tasks that don't require specialized knowledge or a lot of independent judgment. This is especially important for jobs that sound professional but actually involve lots of repetitive tasks or following set procedures.
So just because someone works in an office doesn't automatically qualify them for that professional exemption. Got it. All right. It's about digging deeper and really understanding the core responsibilities. Are there any tools or resources that businesses can use to help them conduct these audits effectively?
Absolutely. There's a ton of information out there. The Department of Labor's website is a great place to start.
Okay, good to know.
They've got fact sheets, guides, even an online tool that can help you figure out if a job qualifies for an exemption.
That's helpful. So businesses don't have to do this alone. But even with the best tools, these audits can be time-consuming, especially for larger companies with lots of different roles. Any tips on how to make the process more efficient?
One strategy is to prioritize auditing those jobs that are most likely to be misclassified.
Okay, that makes sense.
For example, if you have a bunch of employees in supervisory roles or positions that have a mix of exempt and non-exempt duties, those might be good places to start. You could also think about using software or online tools that are designed specifically to help with job classification and duties test audits.
So work smarter, not harder. But even with the best prep, a business might find some misclassified employees during an audit. What happens then? What should they do to fix the situation?
That's a great question. First things first, address the misclassification immediately and make sure that employee gets paid correctly for any missed overtime. Then you need to look at your policies and procedures to prevent it from happening again. This might mean updating job descriptions, training managers better, or even getting new timekeeping systems.
So it's not just about putting out the fire. It's about preventing future fires. And I bet an employment lawyer can help with that.
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to get legal advice to make sure you're following all the rules.
Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the new administration. What do you think they'll do about all this overtime stuff? Could they try to revive those DOL changes?
It's definitely possible. They've made it clear that protecting workers is a priority, so it wouldn't be surprising if they took another look at this. However, they'll likely need to take a different approach than the last administration to avoid those same legal roadblocks.
Sounds like we might be in for another round of overtime drama. But this time, businesses have more knowledge and experience. They faced uncertainty, learned about the duties test, and hopefully started taking steps to be prepared. What about the bigger picture, though? This whole saga seems to be highlighting a fundamental conflict between what employers want and what employees need, a struggle to balance fair pay with the needs of the business.
You're spot on. And that conflict is only going to get more intense as the nature of work keeps changing. We're seeing more remote work, more gig work, and more people wanting flexibility and a better work-life balance.
Yeah, things are definitely shifting.
All of this is challenging our traditional ideas about employment and forcing us to rethink how we define work and how we value what employees contribute.
It's like the old rules are being rewritten. What might the future of work actually look like?
Well, one possibility is that we move away from those rigid hourly pay models and toward approaches that are more focused on results.
Interesting.
Instead of just looking at the number of hours worked, businesses might start prioritizing the value and results employees deliver, regardless of when or where they work. This could lead to more flexible work arrangements where people have more control over their schedules and their work-life balance.
So it's about shifting the focus from time spent to value created.
Mhm.
That's a pretty big shift.
It is, and it could have a huge impact on everything from workplace culture to hiring and keeping top talent. Businesses that embrace flexibility and prioritize employee well-being are probably going to have an edge when it comes to attracting and keeping great people.
It sounds like a win-win for everyone. But this transition won't happen overnight, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that businesses and policymakers might face in this new world of work?
One of the biggest hurdles will be making sure things are fair for all workers, no matter their employment status or how they work. We need to make sure everyone has access to decent wages, benefits, and protections, whether they're working remotely, as freelancers, or in more traditional jobs.
It's about creating a system that works for everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. And this is where those tricky legal questions come back into play.
Right. How do we update our laws to reflect this new world of work?
Exactly. How do we make sure everyone is protected and that businesses are operating ethically?
Those are some big questions.
They are. Policymakers and legal experts are wrestling with these issues right now. Finding the right answers won't be easy, but it will require careful thought, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt to this ever-changing landscape. But one thing's for sure. The conversation about overtime, fairness, and the future of work isn't going away anytime soon. It's a conversation that's going to keep evolving and shaping the world of work for years to come.
And it's a conversation we all need to be a part of. By staying informed, talking to each other, and sharing our perspectives, we can help shape the future of work and create a system that is fair and benefits everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's about working together to create a better future for all.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part. We've looked at the background of these overtime rule changes, dissected the duties test, talked about the risks of misclassification, and even peeked into the future of work. But we're not done yet. In the next part, we're going to dive even deeper into those potential scenarios and discuss some practical steps businesses can take to navigate this constantly changing landscape. Stay tuned.
So we've established that the future of these overtime rules is a bit of a mystery, right? It's like we're at a crossroads with a bunch of different paths ahead.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And knowing which path to take is tough, especially for businesses trying to plan and make good decisions.
Yeah.
What are some of the scenarios that could play out? Give us a glimpse of those potential paths.
Okay, so one possibility is that the new administration decides to pick up where the last one left off and tries to revive those DOL changes.
Interesting.
They might try a different legal strategy, like going through that Administrative Procedure Act the court mentioned, try to avoid those procedural roadblocks.
So a potential comeback for the DOL changes, but with a different legal playbook.
Yeah.
What would that process actually look like? Would it be a quick fix, or are we talking about a long, drawn-out affair?
Oh, it wouldn't be a quick fix. Think more like a marathon, not a sprint.
Got it.
That Administrative Procedure Act, APA for short, is basically a set of rules that federal agencies have to follow when they're creating new regulations. It's like a recipe they need to stick to.
So no cutting corners or skipping steps. What are some of the key ingredients in this APA recipe?
Well, transparency is a big one.
Okay.
They've got to give the public a heads up about what they're planning, let people comment and give feedback, and they need to have a solid justification for the proposed rule. All that takes time. We could be talking months, maybe even years.
So even if the new administration is all about those stronger overtime protections, it's not going to happen overnight. Businesses would have some time to adjust and get ready. What if the states get tired of waiting for the federal government to act? Could they just decide to go their own way?
Absolutely. We've seen it happen with other labor laws, like those minimum wage increases that have been popping up all over.
Yeah, for sure.
Some states are already ahead of the game with their own overtime rules that are tougher than the federal ones. And if more states jump on that bandwagon, well, businesses could find themselves in a tricky situation.
It'd be like a patchwork quilt of overtime regulations, each state with its own little design. Sounds like a logistical nightmare for businesses, especially those operating in multiple states.
It would definitely complicate things.
Yeah.
Businesses would have to navigate a whole maze of different requirements. And it could create inconsistencies for employees, depending on which state they're working in. And we all know what happens when employees feel like the rules are constantly changing and they don't know what to expect.
Right, it can lead to a lot of confusion and frustration.
Exactly. And that can impact morale and productivity.
For sure. So it's a real challenge for businesses to navigate. But even with all this uncertainty, there are things businesses can do to be proactive, right? Let's go back to that duties test. We talked about it earlier, and it seems like it's going to be crucial no matter what happens. Can we unpack that a bit more? Walk through the details.
Okay, think of the duties test like a detective working a case.
All right, I like it.
It's not just about looking at the surface clues. It's about digging deep and analyzing the evidence to see if an employee truly qualifies for an exemption from overtime.
So we're putting on our detective hats and really scrutinizing those job duties. What are some of the key questions we should be asking during this investigation?
Well, the first question is, what does the employee actually do every day? We're not just looking at their fancy job title, we're getting into the nitty-gritty tasks and responsibilities.
Makes sense.
Then we need to ask, do those duties line up with the specific criteria for one of the exemption categories? Things like the executive, administrative, and professional exemptions. Each one has its own set of rules. And finally, are there any red flags that suggest misclassification?
It's like piecing together a puzzle, but sometimes those pieces don't quite fit. What are some warning signs businesses should be looking for during this whole duties test investigation?
One of the most common red flags is misclassifying those employees who do a lot of supervising but don't actually meet the requirements for the executive exemption.
Ah, right. We touched on that earlier.
Just because someone's called a manager doesn't mean they're actually making those big decisions or running the show.
So it's not just about whether they supervise people. It's about the kind of supervision they do and whether it lines up with those executive duties that are outlined in the regulations.
Yeah.
The devil's in the details.
Exactly. And another common mistake is misclassifying employees who might seem professional at first glance but actually spend most of their time doing routine tasks that don't need a lot of specialized knowledge or independent judgment.
Okay.
So just because someone works in an office and maybe wears a suit doesn't mean they automatically qualify for that professional exemption. You got to peel back those layers and understand their core responsibilities.
It's like one of those hidden object games. You really have to look closely to find the clues. What about those timekeeping systems? Our sources mention that many businesses aren't even equipped to track hours accurately for all their employees. Why is that such a big deal?
Oh, it's crucial.
Yeah.
If you're not keeping track of those hours accurately, it's like trying to bake a cake without measuring the ingredients. You're likely to end up with a mess.
Uh-huh. Good analogy.
Accurate timekeeping is essential for making sure employees get paid what they're owed, especially when it comes to overtime. And we've already talked about how hefty those penalties can be for wage and hour violations.
Right. It's not just about avoiding legal trouble. It's about fairness and transparency, making sure employees are getting paid for every minute they work. What are some of the best practices for creating a really good, reliable timekeeping system?
Well, first off, the system has to be accurate and easy to use. No one wants to deal with a clunky system that's more trouble than it's worth.
For sure.
So whether it's a traditional time clock, a software system, or even a mobile app, the key is to choose something that fits your business and makes it easy for employees to track their time accurately.
So find the right tool for the job. But technology is just one part of it, right? You also need to have clear policies and procedures.
Absolutely. Employees need to understand how to record their time when they qualify for overtime and what to do if something's not right. And businesses need a way to review and approve those time records to make sure everything is accurate and above board.
It's about creating a culture of transparency and trust, where everyone understands what's expected and how important accurate timekeeping is. Okay, so we've talked about the duties test and timekeeping, two key pieces of this overtime puzzle. What are some other proactive steps businesses can take to get ready for whatever changes might be coming down the pipeline?
One smart move is to start collecting data on employee hours and compensation. Think of it like building up your knowledge base.
Okay, I like it.
This data will be really valuable when it comes to understanding how any changes might impact you and making smart decisions about how to comply.
So be proactive, do your homework, and don't wait until the last minute to scramble and react.
Exactly. By gathering that data, analyzing trends, and really understanding your workforce, businesses can anticipate potential challenges and develop strategies to deal with them proactively. It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
And what about communication? I bet this whole overtime situation has created a lot of anxiety and uncertainty among employees. How should businesses be talking to their teams about all of this? How can they keep everyone informed and on the same page?
Transparency and open communication are so important here.
Yeah, for sure.
Employees are naturally going to be concerned about how any changes to overtime rules might affect their paychecks and their work-life balance.
Makes sense.
Businesses need to keep their employees in the loop, explain how any changes might impact them, and be responsive to their questions and concerns. And remember, this isn't a one-time conversation. Keep those lines of communication open and be ready to adjust your approach as things evolve.
It's about creating a real dialogue, not just talking at employees.
Exactly.
It's about listening to their concerns, addressing them proactively, and working together to find solutions that benefit everyone. So even though there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this overtime issue, there are concrete steps businesses can take to navigate these choppy waters. It's about staying informed, doing those thorough audits, having good timekeeping systems, and talking openly with your employees. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the long-term impact of all of this? Could this whole debate about overtime rules lead to some bigger changes in how we think about work and compensation?
That's a great question, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. This whole situation really highlights that the world of work is transforming. I mean, at a pace we've never seen before.
Yeah, no doubt.
We're seeing this rise of remote work, the gig economy is booming, and more people are looking for flexibility, wanting a better work-life balance.
Things are definitely changing, that's for sure.
All of this is challenging our traditional ideas about jobs and forcing us to rethink how we even define work and how we value what employees bring to the table.
It's like the rule book is being rewritten right before our eyes. So what might the future of work actually look like? Got any predictions?
Well, one possibility is that we move away from those old school hourly pay models and start using approaches that are more focused on results.
Oh, interesting. So less about punching the clock, more about what you actually achieve.
Exactly. Instead of just counting the hours someone's worked, businesses might start putting more emphasis on the value and the actual results that employees produce, regardless of when or where they work.
Makes sense.
This could open the door to more flexible work arrangements where people have more control over their schedules and can create a better balance between their work and their personal lives.
So it's kind of a win-win, right?
Yeah.
Employees have more flexibility and businesses get better results.
Potentially, yeah. And this shift could have ripple effects on everything. Workplace culture, how we attract and retain talent, the whole game changes.
I bet.
Businesses that are willing to be flexible and prioritize employee well-being, those are the ones that are going to stand out and attract the best people.
It makes sense. Happy employees, productive employees. But this transition, this shift in how we think about work, it's not going to happen overnight, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the roadblocks that businesses and policymakers might run into as we navigate this new world of work?
One of the biggest challenges will be making sure that things are fair for everyone, no matter what their job title is or how they work.
Yeah, fairness is key.
We need to ensure that all workers have access to fair wages, benefits, and those important legal protections, whether they're working remotely, freelancing, or in those more traditional 9-to-5 jobs.
Leveling the playing field. Makes sense.
Absolutely. And this is where those tricky legal questions come up again. How do we update our laws to keep up with this changing world of work? How do we make sure everyone's protected and that businesses are doing the right thing?
Those are some tough questions.
They are, and policymakers and legal experts are grappling with them right now. Finding the right answers isn't going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of thought, a lot of collaboration, and we've got to be willing to adapt to this constantly changing landscape. But one thing is crystal clear, this conversation about overtime, about fairness, about the future of work, it's not over. It's going to keep going, keep evolving, and keep shaping the way we work for a long time.
It's a conversation we all need to be a part of.
Right.
The more informed we are, the more we talk to each other and share our different viewpoints, the better chance we have of creating a future of work that's fair and truly benefits everyone.
I couldn't agree more. It's about coming together and creating a better future. For everyone.
Okay, so we've explored a lot in this deep dive. We've looked at those potential scenarios, the complexities of the duties test and timekeeping, and even pondered those long-term implications of this whole overtime saga. But let's zoom out for a second and think about what this all means for you, our listeners. What are the key takeaways you can walk away with today?
Well, I think this whole thing serves as a giant wake-up call. Wage and hour laws, they're constantly evolving, and businesses need to stay informed and be ready to adapt.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And it's not just about following the rules to avoid legal problems. It's about being a good employer, treating your people fairly, and building a workplace where everyone feels respected and valued.
It's good business, and it's the right thing to do. So, knowledge is power, but action is key. What are some concrete steps our listeners can take right now to put all this knowledge into practice?
Being proactive is key. Don't wait for a new law to be passed before you start thinking about the implications. Take a look at your current practices. Are you confident in how you've classified your employees? Do you have a solid timekeeping system? If not, now's the time to address those things.
Like giving your business an overtime checkup. And speaking of checkups, those duties test audits we talked about, those are essential.
Absolutely essential. Think of it as preventative medicine for your business.
I like it.
By doing those audits, you can spot any potential misclassifications early and avoid those legal headaches later on.
Smart move.
And don't forget about those resources we mentioned, the Department of Labor website, online tools, legal advice, all of that can help you through this process.
So don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Audits and timekeeping are super important, but what about those bigger picture questions that businesses should be considering?
One of the smartest things businesses can do is start gathering data on employee hours and how they're compensated.
Makes sense.
That data is like gold. It can help you analyze trends, spot potential problems, and make informed decisions about how to adapt to any changes.
Data is definitely king. But it's not just about numbers, right? What about communication? How should businesses be talking to their employees about all this stuff?
Transparency is absolutely vital. Employees are naturally going to be worried about how these changes might affect their paychecks and their lives outside of work.
Yeah, of course.
Be upfront with them about what might happen, answer their questions honestly, and listen to their concerns. And remember, this isn't a one-and-done conversation. Keep those lines of communication open and be willing to adjust as things change.
It's about building that trust and creating a real partnership with your employees. And that goes way beyond just following the law. It's about creating a positive, supportive workplace.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, from those proposed FLSA changes to the duties test, timekeeping best practices, and even a peek into the future of work. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just this. The world of work is changing, and businesses need to be ready to change with it. Be informed, be proactive, and keep those lines of communication open.
Great advice. Well, to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the ever-evolving world of overtime rules. It's a complex landscape, but with the right knowledge and the right approach, businesses can navigate these changes successfully and create a more fair and equitable workplace for everyone. Thanks for listening.
And that's it for today. Be sure to check us out at peopleworks.io, and as always, tune in next time.